Hello again. We are to Chapter 3, Altered States. Alright, this is Book 3, Andy Brighton and the Dragons of Wyrme, The End of Worlds. Chapter 3, Altered States. Alright, the silence was deafening on level 20 of Command Orbital Omnia, the lowest level that could be traversed and that served as the floor, so to speak, of the inner area of the ship. The huge area served as a large cargo hold, and presently sealed cages containing the Vol dragons lined the circumference of the hull. There were hundreds of them, and if not for certain fumes to keep the dragons unconscious, they would have undoubtedly be causing quite an uproar. Presently, however, they were well controlled and docile, slumbering peacefully. These vessels were capable of hauling nearly anything, only limited by the imagination. Today, this one stood almost totally empty, except for a few persons assembled in neat formation not that far from the main elevator. They had arrived about an hour ago, having flown over in Volar ships from all the orbitals, parking each within the landing bay, one after another, for a total of 8 commanders and their second-in-command, each standing behind them, and now waiting patiently for General Danival to make his presentation. The men and women standing there had no clue why they had been mustered this day, but the quiet speculation among them was all good. Commendations, promotions, awards of some sort, and the like. They had no reason to think otherwise. Things had been going splendidly to their knowledge for quite a while. Now, no problems had occurred recently to warrant anything bad. So each of them had only positive thoughts and were all hopefully optimistic. Across the hold, the general and Sargerius Ternay emerged at the foot of the great central pillar and paused to speak quietly for a moment, perhaps to better collect their thoughts before approaching. Danival walked the line of commanders, shaking their hands and thanking them for attending. Finished with the pleasantries, he stood before them to speak. Commanders, I wish to thank you all for so many things, for your service to the Ticanus, for your loyalty and support to our cause, and for your unwavering devotion and reliability. I can think of no finer group of men and women that I would want to be here. He then took a breath and looked down before proceeding with his next comments. I have been informed by members of the tribunal court, however, that my policies are not welcome, that they do not agree with my decision-making or my use of these orbital vessels. Whispers echoed around the group. Danival waited until it died down and then continued. It has been decided, or should I say they have decided, that I will step down as general and turn over these vessels and all assets to the tribunal court in 1 week. I felt that each of you deserved to know this, because the court has also implicated each of you as well. I wanted you all to know that I will plead for your innocence. You were only following my orders and do not deserve to be punished. I will take full responsibility for my actions. A wave of chants in support of the general began growing louder and louder, and for a few moments it appeared as if a resistance was forming among the group. This allegiance to him made his heart grow warm, but Danival had made up his mind. There would be no defiance against the Ticanus. That would only make things worse than they already were. So he held up his hand to quiet down his commanders and ended the commotion to resume the briefing. I know it is not the way we wanted things to go. I'm sure that these decisions have angered each of you as they have angered me. If there was some other alternative or action that could be taken, I would give it due consideration. But as I see it, there is no other way. So we will all abide by the decisions made by the tribunal court, no matter how we may dislike them. If any of you have any questions, you can relay them up the chain of command. Once again, I thank you for your courage and support. That will be all. Having said his piece, he now wished to be alone with his thoughts, and so Danival and his Sargerius then rode the central elevator up to the command deck. The general gave his second-in-command a few parting orders, nothing out of the ordinary, and excused him to go about his duties. Now alone, Danival began the tedious job of packing away his personal belongings and various souvenirs he hoped he might be allowed to keep in his time of upcoming internment. He really didn't know exactly what to expect the tribunal judges to do to him, or what his punishment would entail, or even if he could keep his commanders from a fate equal to his. This was a first-time experience that, quite frankly, started to frighten him, because it wasn't something he could order away or even fight. He had to go through it on his own, whether he wanted to or not. He had bundled the most important items into travel cases, and lastly came his collection of trinkets and baubles he had plucked from the worlds that had been conquered. Dozens and dozens of beautifully crafted artworks. He had placed one by one into a series of cabinets along the chamber wall, each one representing an entire civilization taken down by his orders, perfectly placed and lit to show every facet of their creation, the handiworks of those who had given their lives and very souls to the Decanus Empire. As Danival scanned the collection, he suddenly began to feel something within him, a feeling strangely odd and unsettling that forced him to the floor. It was not pain or discomfort he was sensing, those he was familiar with. No, this was different and new. It was touching him in a peculiar way and racking his brain. He crouched down and tried to fathom what this was that was tearing at his psyche like a splinter in his mind. He felt obliged to scream there, his head nearly touching the dark Erdenium beneath him. But all he could do was to groan in agony for several moments until the spell slowly faded and he was able to rise again. As he did so, his eyes grew heavy. I lost my place. And his sight blurred. He wiped a few tears away using the sleeve of his shirt, a bewildered expression on his face. Perplexed by this experience and embarrassed by his behavior, he only wished for it to pass and be forgotten quickly, and so he stood and returned to his endeavor. I do not believe these will be going with me, he sighed, quietly under his breath, in reflection on the hoard of ornaments adorning the cabinets. I suppose one could say that they are partly the proof of my crimes, or at the very least the evidence of them. He had not looked upon these items in such a way before, but instead had regarded them as trophies and a testament of his hard work. Perhaps he had accepted his fate now and was trying to see things from a different perspective other than his own. At any rate, he was done thinking of all of them as rewards to be proud of. All but one, for he still had the beating heart of the fire dragon to deal with. Danival reached over and opened the case on the table and was instantly amazed to see the heart. It pounded as if blood was pumping through it, even though there was none to be pumped. That, he thought, was probably the most remarkable thing about it, its sheer will to live. The thing refused to die, nor did it know how to be destroyed, he imagined, for they had thrown everything they had at it, and yet it remained unscathed. Simply amazing and intriguing, truly a mystery, he sighed. Again, this time not for himself, but for the knowledge that would be lost by not studying this object fully. However, sadly, ye precious thing will have to be the final and most remarkable addition to this collection. The general opened the in-cabinet glass and positioned a pre-made stand onto which the heart was to be settled on into, its final resting place. He picked the heart up with both hands. It was larger and heavier than a human heart, and strangely shaped, almost triangular. But before he could make the move to place it into the receptacle, he felt the urge to give it a hug for some reason. Maybe because this would be the last one, or maybe because it was part of a living being, or maybe there was something else prompting his action, who is to say. He was ready to put it into the cabinet, but suddenly could not part it from his chest. It was as if it was a magnet and he had become metal, and they were attracted to one another by some strong bond, some force that was both overwhelming and unbreakable. What the blazes? He said, struggling to pull it away, but losing his grip at every attempt. The longer this went on, the stronger the attraction there was, and the more panicked Danival became. Then, with a dull snap, the heart began to crack through his sternum. He fell to one knee and was racked by an agonizing pain. He could struggle to try and free his heart from his chest no longer. All he could do was to accept this, whatever it was that was happening, and endure the pain until it either ended or he was dead, whichever came first. One thought did come to mind to him as he waited for the end. Is this an assassination attempt? If it was, it had been cleverly done and unique in its delivery. He knew that he did have enemies, and who wanted him to die for many reasons. However, if it was, he knew he'd never know who it would be dead, for he would be dead. So the last action he took before succumbing was to press the button on a comm panel and yell, "Ternay, come quickly!" The heart then began to bore itself through his skin and muscle and through the bones of his chest. Danival fell to the floor and onto his back. Bleeding was kept to a near minimum, as the action the heart took was self-sealing and more of an absorption process rather than removal of what had previously existed. It was as if this new heart was moving in and taking the place of its former one, and once inside the chest cavity and the plumbing was secure, so to speak, the regenerative properties inherent in all dragons took over. The wound was quickly healed, and within moments one could hardly tell that anything had happened at all. The Sargeras rushed into the room and frantically looked around for the general, who he found starting to get up from where he had fallen. "Sir, are you all right?" Ternay asked, concerned. Danival nodded as he was helped up, but was still as yet unable to speak. He breathed heavily for a while, and in a minute or so, he was finally up to talking. "I must have passed out," he explained. "Sir, I should call for the medic." Danival sat up in a chair and reluctantly agreed with his Sargeras, and so they waited, and the medic came to examine the general. A cursory exam was done at his behest, which found nothing out of sorts. But of course, a more thorough medical checkup was advised to be performed at Danival's earliest opportunity to make absolutely sure that he was okay, to which he agreed, and then excused the medic and soon afterwards the Sargeras as well. During the exam, Danival had not spoken of what had just transpired. He knew he had been under a lot of stress this day because of everything that was happening and the uncertainty of his immediate future. "Maybe I just imagined it," he thought. "It couldn't have really happened, right? I could have fallen unconscious and dreamt it. I was on the floor, Ternay had to help me up, and I'm not in any pain." So he felt of his chest and could not detect any perceptible change. So he decided that yes, he must have had some terrible nightmare about the Vole heart after he had collapsed, and so he put it out of his mind and went about continuing to pack up the last of his belongings. It had been only about an hour since the dragon heart had taken the place of his former heart, and Danival was feeling much better. So much so he began jogging around the room like a little kid again and shadowboxing the walls. He felt as if he could take on the world, like an up-and-coming prize fighter, eager to beat anyone that got in his way. He punched one of the walls for fun and heard an alarming crack sound. Afraid he might have broken his fingers or knuckles, he felt of his hand, and it was fine. However, looking up, he saw that where he had hit the wall, there was an indentation and crack marks. So he punched the wall again, over and over, harder and harder, and the more he did, the deeper his punches went. After several seconds, he stopped to look at his hands and found them to be unscathed. However, the wall was a battered mess. A depression several inches deep had been bashed into the urdanium. Cracks radiated outwards for a few feet in all directions, and bits of stone lay crumbled on the floor. Meanwhile, Danival felt like nothing had happened at all. His feet, he was as fresh as a daisy. "Now that's a bit unusual," he admitted, and now he worried that the dragon heart had actually burrowed itself into his chest. He checked the case on the table, and the heart was missing, and it wasn't sitting in the collection cabinet where he had left a place for it either. "Where did you go?" To make absolutely sure, he tried a test that he assumed would work. He had an X-ray device of sorts, a wand-like gadget, whose signal he could send to a computer monitor in the room. He could pass the wand over his chest and observe what was inside in real time. So this was what he did, and as he waved the wand over his chest, it revealed a larger than normal, triangular-shaped heart pumping away. He immediately dropped the wand and stepped back from the monitor. "It's true, it's inside me," he whispered, afraid at first, but after a few seconds he grew angry. It was his own doing. He was to blame for all of it. So his anger was not towards others, but directed inwards. He had given the orders, he had captured the bulls, he had taken the heart, and now he had it in his chest. Why? What am I to do now? He asked rhetorically. He wondered what was the point of having this thing in him. He slammed his fist on the table and cleaved the top neatly in half with a loud cracker track. He stood there alarmed by the ease at which he had destroyed the solid urdanium table. Once again he was unharmed, and then it hit him. The alternative he was looking for. But just being extremely strong and fast might not be enough, he thought. The heart must keep us safe, even from that which is deadly. He rubbed his hands together. The skin felt hard, even a slight bit scaly, like a lizard, and it had a little give. It had little give. In fact, all of his skin was now this way. The heart had quickly changed him into something else, an altered being. Maybe, he guessed, much like the voles themselves. He was now nearly impervious to all damage. But he knew for sure he would have to put this theory to the test for real. Danival retrieved a guard baton from a uniform locker and dialed it to the lowest setting that could only stun, then touched it to his arm. An electrical crack was made like a sound of a distant thunder, but he felt nothing. It had not affected him. There were 5 total settings, so he tried the next 3 one by one, cranking up the strength of the weapon's damage output, each time and producing a louder and louder crack sound with each attempt. But yet again the baton had failed to hurt him, although the 4th one he had slightly felt as a tingling sensation for a few moments, which then faded away. Having withstood more than anyone would normally be capable of and remained standing, all that was left was to try the final setting. This was very rarely used by the guards because of the ramifications it entailed, and was only necessary under extreme circumstances, because it meant death for the person it touched. So he set it to lethal and prepared himself. It's the only way to know for sure, he whispered, and then struck his arm with the baton, creating an interesting snap sound. The immediate effect was strange, for it left him more angry than anything. A small glowing orange circle had formed where the baton had touched him, that faded away in mere seconds. If that's all it's got, then we will be unstoppable, Danival proclaimed excitedly. But I cannot do this myself. I'll need the others to be with me. I must show them the way. He knew what he needed to do. He had the means to do it, but he had to be quick, for in only a few days this chance would be gone. And even though he thought the plan could work, there still remained the possibility of failure due to his commander's refusal to go along, for if they did, none of this would matter. He pressed the button on the comm panel and spoke. Tournay, come to my room. The Sargeras promptly replied, right away, sir, and within a few seconds Tournay had entered and was ready for orders. I want 17 voles, not Lord Afnar, cremated immediately and their hearts boxed up. Have them brought to level 20 where we had the meeting earlier. And tell the workers to be very careful when moving the hearts. Tell them to use long-handled tools and never touch them. Sargeras took a few moments to appreciate the general's order, as it was rather peculiar. However, finally he replied, It will be carried out, sir. They should be ready and waiting in the hold within 2 hours. Very good, said General Denham. And Tournay, in 3 hours from now, I want you to assemble the commanders as well as the sub-commanders for another announcement. Have them muster at the same location as they did earlier. But, sir, they just did that and got back to their orbitals not an hour or so ago. Are you sure you want me to have them come back again? I am certain, he said. This is a time-sensitive mission. I understand that it might be an odd request, but when you hear my plan fully, I think that you and the others will agree to my proposal, so get it done. As you wish, Tournay said, although not yet understanding why. But he had known the general for a long time, and not only believed in him, he had confidence that Danival wouldn't be giving these orders unless he had good reason. And so the commands were given and carried out in short order, and soon they would all hear what plan the general had come up with. New storyline. Faye looked out over the waters surrounding her new home, Arku, taking in the grand and majestic scenery spread out in every direction. It was like a whole new world, albeit smaller than an actual entire world like the planet Wyrme. However, she had to go back on that thought because before, in their city of time, They were trapped within it and forced to stay there under the illusion of wormwood. Here, on the other hand, there existed an even larger city and room beyond in which they could roam, and no subterfuge or disguise was keeping anyone from seeing them here. Although she knew this vessel was far from others' prying eyes, way out in the middle of the endless ocean, where no one but a fool would normally dare to venture. She had strolled over halfway around the grand promenade, and both overlooked the water and encircled the city, and had trekked, she guessed, several kilometers, pleasantly enjoying the sights, sounds, and even smells our crew had to offer. As appealing as the first two were, the third suddenly outdid the others when the odor of freshly baked shroom loaf wafted in the breeze and piqued her senses, an appetizing aroma which quickly drew her attention away from other things. A scan of the city quickly located the culprit, a squat building not that very far away, with twin chimneys atop both, piping out delicious-smelling smoke. It was more than she could bear, and so she ran to the front entrance and yanked at the door, but it was locked. "We're still closed," came a woman's voice from somewhere inside. A clanging of pots and pans falling on the floor preceded a number of expletives not usually expressed in public, followed by the sounds of shoe steps approaching. "I'm sorry to bother you," Faye yelled. "I thought I caught a whiff of what you were cooking in there." She then spoke more quietly, as if to herself. "It's wonderful." A woman unknown to Faye raised the blinds on the door and peered through the glass at the expectant Faye and reiterated her assertion. "I said we're closed. We're still closed." Faye stood dejected and almost walked away, but then heard footsteps of a second person approaching, who told the first woman to return to the ovens. She then finally reached the door and looked at Faye through the glass and couldn't help smiling at the young girl, who had interrupted her baking with such a nice compliment. "Well, I suppose opening early won't do anyone any harm, now will it?" asked the woman, unlocking the door and pulling out a jar. "I'll just leave it open and get some fresh air in here then," she said, sliding the doorstop in the shape of a large mushroom in the way with her foot. "So what brings you?" the woman began, but before she could finish her question, Faye had run over and was hugging the woman to her astonishment, for she had not recognized the girl. Afterwards, they finished the embrace, and she got a better look at, and her memory clicked. "Faye, is that you?" Faye could not immediately answer her question, as she was too emotional. But in a few moments, her senses calmed enough for her to talk again. "Hedda, yes, it's me," Faye affirmed. "It's been too long." "Well, come in, let us talk, and have some bread." "Oh, but wait just a moment while we tend to these loaves. My apprentice hasn't gotten the hang of this yet." She walked quickly over and checked to make sure nothing was burning. "I think they're about finished." Hedda and her apprentice had 4 ovens going at once. The heat given off was palpable and made Faye cringe even from across the room, but it didn't seem to affect Hedda in the slightest. Nimbly, the woman removed several loaves and slid them into a cooling rack. Then Hedda came over and offered Faye a chair at a table, as well as some fresh bread and butter to snack upon. "Sit and rest a moment, Hedda," said Faye to the aged woman, who was, she guessed, must be going on 90, but was as spry as a teenager. Perhaps her working around the magical mushrooms all her life was the root of it, and a kind of fountain of youth to keep her body young. And even though this was true, she was teaching her skills to another for the day when the light left her and she could pass on to the next world. "I see your grandfather on occasion, girl. He's getting old, but he still favors my breads to all others." Faye remembered Arthurio bringing home bags stuffed with Hedda's creations at least every week when they lived in time. They were, she thought, the essential part of every meal. Even a snack might start with a roll or biscuit. "And so he should, Hedda. We all do. You fed us my whole life, my entire family. You kept time alive. I'm so glad you're here. And oh my, this butter is simply to die for. Where did you get it?" "Oh dear, we keep a pair of ahuntzak in the pen back behind the bakery." Ahuntzak being similar to goats. Hedda smiled and gripped Faye's hand and remembered the old times. "Did I ever tell you I grew up in time? Me and your grandfather, we were little kids so long ago. Of course, we had to be careful running around as children do. We were not allowed to leave the city, they warned us, or else the dragons might see us and spoil the illusion." Faye had been specifically told this by her parents as well. All young Raishori children knew not to stray outside the city, and for over 1,000 years this was the norm. But now Faye could see that all Rasuri had a fresh start in this place, and there was no need for the children to worry about such things anymore. I have a feeling this place will work out, Hedda. From what I have already seen, I cannot disapprove. In fact, finding you here has made my day. Hedda couldn't be happier hearing Faye tell her this. This was my calling, girl, said Hedda. And after having done it day in and day out, my life's work, I don't have any regrets. Those words, her calling, drew Faye's attention because she had learned of her own calling just recently, deep in the undermine by the great anchorite. I was told that I am apparently a channeler, she said, noticeably disappointed. At least that was what Krimlogi said to me when I asked him what my special power was. That's my calling, a channeler. Hedda looked confused by Faye's reaction. Why does that sadden you, my dear? I hoped that I was meant for something more, a higher purpose than just... Faye shook her head, looking down at the table. But you are, Faye, encouraged Hedda. Do you know what a channeler really is? Faye looked up at the old woman, who was more wise in the way of things than Faye could have ever imagined. It is someone who is always there for you when you need their help the most. That's what a channeler really is. It has nothing to do with magic or casting spells, even though I'm sure you're very capable of that too. It's being a partner, a companion, a friend, even a wife. Faye had never thought of it like that the description meant more than playing a role. Rather, it was her purpose and what she should strive for and endeavor towards. It could even be a clue to her future, she hoped. This had definitely cheered her up, an inspiration, even a pep talk, so to speak. And so she left it at that and said no more about it. They sat for a good while, reminiscing the past and making plans for the future as the morning light filled the room. At length, Hedda's apprentice needed urgent help with the baking breads, and so they said their goodbyes, and Faye politely excused herself. Back outside, she resumed her walk about the grand promenade, exploring the sights. She planned on making a full circle hike around the city and get to know the layout if possible. One feature of note were the bridges to the outer areas. She saw that they were going off in 3 equidistant directions, like a giant letter Y. This design implied, she thought, a separation of 3 communities within the vessel, with the bridges each accessing one of those areas. It was an assumption and possibly just a coincidence of design, but she could not shake the idea. One important note about the bridges she could easily tell was their original construction was definitely not Rasori. For one reason, they were not of bluestone, like the city, and for another reason, they were much older than even ancient. In fact, she felt as if they might not be that much newer than this orbital itself. Of course, the magical walkway atop the bridges was a Rasori creation, and if you only looked at that, you might miss what lay beneath. Also of note was what she could see in the distance to where the bridges led. Her vision was greatly obscured at times by the fog, and she could only see about halfway across the water before she lost sight of what was out beyond near to the hull walls. However, sometimes light shone down through upper windows, and the mist parted long enough to see something out there. Of course, where they had arrived lay a great park-like area, and she imagined maybe the other 2 bridges led to parks as well, because if they had made it so, it was a logical design to make the layout within the orbital uniform and symmetrical. In spite of that theory, what she saw glimpses of confused her, because out past one bridge stretched like giant trees, and past the other snowy mountains and large caves. Were these illusions, she wondered? Her brethren were known for casting spells and creating such things, and so it was not beyond possibility. I'll have to ask about that later, she said to herself. For the time being, she had grown a bit tired of the walking and needed to find where she would be staying. She assumed her father, Orto, had procured a home here in Arku, and was even wondering why she hadn't yet arrived there for him to greet her. Either that, or he was busy hobnobbing with other elder members of the council and networking. He loved doing that, she remembered from her life back in the City of Time, as he was seldom ever home. And so, since she hadn't yet found out, she walked over to one of the table maps and asked it about her father. Map, where is Orto Grafja? The map immediately grew brighter, and a spot was highlighted indicating where to find her father, and a short description next to it read, Orthographia, 35 West Upper Tower Building, Level 8. As before, after a few seconds, the map returned to its previous brightness and resumed to function normally. She saw that the path was clear and should take her only a few minutes to walk, by her reckoning. And so with a bit of yawn, she began to trek to see about her new home here in this great new bluestone city of Arku, and hopefully get several hours of sleep. She needed them. All right, that's chapter 3. Book 3, The End of Worlds. All right. We will see you next time on chapter 4.